Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. It's 11 o'clock. Welcome everyone to the MMUF End of Summer Showcase, where we are highlighting the work of our Mellon Fellows who have been at various locations, including their favorite spot at home to broadcast and to accept the virtual training they've been getting all summer. We've had students at Johns Hopkins University and the Humanities Collaboratory. We've had 2 students at UCLA. And we've had students also working with Natalie Von Wen, who is a PhD student at the University of Washington in the Geography Department, and Paula Colucci, who is a PhD candidate from Old Dominion University, currently teaching at Central Washington University. So we're thrilled that some of you have doubled up, even tripled up on your preparation. I know that multiple meetings a week were taking place, both individually and in our mentoring circles, which included 3 students. And the work was deep and intense and challenging, and we appreciate Natalie offering us resources through the University of Washington's library, emailing you articles in a timely fashion that you were not able to get through our system, and Paula also supporting in multiple ways, recommending books. The story goes that Natalie bicycled from her home on Bainbridge Island. How many miles one way to U of W Library? Was it like 10, 15? I don't know how many miles. Several miles to the University of Washington Library for the sole purpose of bringing Millie a book back to Seattle. I was in Seattle, so I drove that book, you know, MMUF Pony Express. So Millie had a book that she needed too. So we've done multiple things, all of us, to support each other this summer. And we especially want to welcome our MMUF Continuing Fellow, Yesenia Hunter from USC, who is wonderfully integrating herself into the history department, chaired by Dr. Blake Slonecker, who's also with us. And she is doing wonderful work and will continue doing that work with our students at Heritage. And Dr. Slonecker is a longtime mentor of our MMUF program, a support for many students going through his department, and we depend on both of them for much of our referral process. So with that said, I will change hands, turn it over to Natalie Von Wen.
Okay, yes, thank you for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. So the format that we'll use today, we'll have each participant do their poster presentation that will be about 7 minutes. We'll have time for some specific Q&A immediately following their presentation. But after all of our presenters go, there are 4 of them, we'll also open it up to a panel style Q&A. And I think, Perla, you are our first presenter. So you have screen sharing permission, and we're excited to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, okay, let's begin. Let me start by sharing my screen.
Perla, before you get started, can you just do a 1-minute introduction also of yourself?
Of course, it's all part of the first wife.
Pardon me. Thank you. You're way ahead of me.
Okay, let's begin. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Perla Bolanos, and I am a student at Heritage University studying both business and English. This summer, I was selected to be part of the Johns Hopkins Humanities Collaboratory to complete my own research project. And the title of my research is Rebel Daughter, the Necessary Rejection of Familismo en Viola Canales, the Tequila War. To begin with, I'll be defining the term familismo. Familismo was defined in the early 1950s as a universal concept referring to strong inward feelings, emphasis on family goals, common property, mutual support, and the desire to pursue the perpetuation of the family. It has been validated in subsequent studies across cultural groups. Today, scholars define familismo, or familism in English, as one of the central elements of Latinx culture and has been argued to be one of the most important factors impacting decision-making in Latino youth. Familismo refers to the importance of strong family loyalty, closeness, and getting along with contributing to the well-being of the nuclear and extended family and kinship networks. Given the social importance and functional salience of ethnicity in the US, I argue that while superficially, the tequila worm espouses a multicultural approach to teaching about one's culture and learning the importance of family, a closer reading reveals that the tequila worm engages with colonialism by emphasizing that the Latino family must be broken for the individual to succeed, which requires a rejection of familismo. The purpose of this study is to examine the impact of familism in Sophia's career in order to better understand whether the construct of familism served as a support or a hindrance. In my project, I'll be doing a close reading of the Chicana novel, The Tequila Worm by Viola Canales. The Tequila Worm is a functionalized memoir of growing up in the warm embrace of the Mexican-American barrio of McAllen, Texas. I'll be analyzing this piece as a literary construction built through narrative conventions as to create and exemplify the Chicana feminist Golden's romance for Mexican-American girls. Crucial to the classification within the new genre is the way it narrates the growth of the novel's protagonist, Sofia Casas, over an extended time. The novel establishes values of sharing, respecting the Catholic faith, participating in family traditions, and being proud of oneself and one's heritage. When Sofia singled out to receive a scholarship to an elite boarding school, she longs to explore life beyond the barrio, even though it means leaving her family to navigate a strange world of the rich. This section involves Sofia having to go against the family traditions and values in order to convince them to let her take this opportunity. It's not an easy task, as Sofia becomes the rebel daughter wanting to break traditions. After lots of convincing work, Sofia is found attending and excelling for 3 years at her new school. This unconventional structure for a YA novel validates the importance of life phases of Mexican-American girls and women who are socially and economically marginalized in the US. Past scholars have found that values such as respect, collectivism, having good morals, and belief in authority have been found to be of high importance in the Latino family. This may be true for others' experiences, but the traditional role that Latinas learn may or may not be different from that of other populations. For example, according to Roberta Espinosa, the typical role that Latinas learn while growing up is the role of becoming the good daughter, a role that leads Latinas to being passive, obedient, and helping around the home, as well as becoming good wives and mothers who take care of everything in the home, children, elders, and other relatives. It is critical for Sofia to follow her parents' house rules if she wants to receive their full support. Due to these strong bonds, it is of high importance for Sofia not to bring shame to the family name by honoring and respecting the traditions and values of the family and helping each other no matter the situation. The critical awareness Sofia gains through her secondary education at an elite boarding school goes beyond academics. Sofia's growth includes developing confidence in her identity, and this is achieved by her rejection of familiar traditions. Marianismo is interconnected with religion and Catholicism's strong influence on Latinx culture since colonialism. Marianismo embodies virtues often associated with the Virgin Mary, such as selflessness, sincerity, humility, chastity, caretaking, and devotion to children, husbands, and homemaking. Latinas are socialized from a young age into the behaviors and values associated with Marianismo, including but not limited to obedience, femininity, weakness, and submission. Latinas in college are often presented with an ideology that conflicts with Marianismo and may wish to become more independent in a less restrictive culture. Yet studies show how deeply entrenched Marianismo and familismo are among Latinas. We must understand how Latinas perceive their family roles and the possibility that Marianismo may buttress or undermine that college persistence and the continued self-sacrifice of being the perfect daughter. The process of acculturation takes place over time and occurs when an individual or a group adopts the attitudes and values of a mainstream culture due to the continuous exposure. Latinos maintain aspects of their cultura while adopting facets of the US culture. For example, growing up, Sofia grasps the influences of individualism when it comes to money situations and occupational mobility expectations, which are part of the US culture. Sofia longs to experience the other side of town, as she calls it, where, quote, the houses are nice and warm, end quote. She finds it difficult to understand why such economic status exists. In addition, the lack of Mexican or Mexican-American culture exposure at school contributes to Sofia's struggle with identity. This is a result of the lack of exposure Sofia's family has given her to other cultures throughout her childhood. It takes Sophia a great deal to finally develop and understand her dual identity as a Mexican American, having two homes and two languages influencing her values. Sophia is influenced by family and societal expectations, often based on stereotypes of Latinas as submissive, underachievers, and caretakers. When these stereotypes are internalized, Sophia has found doubting her chances for academic and career success and hurting her self-esteem, which hinders her motivation and engagement in school. Also, like most Latinas, Sophia lacks educational and career role models among her family members and peers to help her set goals and envision herself to reach those goals. For Sophia, getting a private education and rising in financial resources are worthwhile goals for her. Sophia confides in Berta, her cousin, her aspiration to, quote, go to college, make money, and buy a nice house for Papa and Mama, and maybe become a lawyer, end quote. Berta raises the concern that, quote, women are lawyers, Sophia, and especially non-Mexican women, her wives, mothers, and if they're lucky, teachers or nurses, end quote. Sophia disproves that bias, outdated view, and overcomes stereotypes and discrimination by achieving her ambitions. Sophia defies the stereotypical role of subservient housewives and submissive girls for an education by creating the value of leaving home in order to achieve independence and building her own identity outside of her home. The ways in which familismo manifests in everyday Sophia's family appear to have consequences for her development. For Latinos families who face numerous obstacles in raising children, including stressors related to poverty, acculturation, and discrimination, familismo may serve as a protective role in children's development. Notably, however, there's also an emerging evidence pointing to the potential cost of familismo. Sophia never aspires for the acquisition of luxury goods nor seeks to erase her cultural heritage either before or after she becomes professionally successful. As discussed by Ansaldo, too few Chicanas in the past had the option of entering the world by way of education and career and becoming self-autonomous persons, which is what Sophia seeks and achieves. Sophia demonstrates that Chicanas are not defined through marriage and children by being the one, quote, breaking the mold, end quote. The tequila worm embodies and addresses the potential conflicts between being an individual and being part of a Latino family, because the individual is known to exist first as a family member, then last as self. However, the necessary rejection of familismo allows Sophia to create a clear statement for her and empower the feminist perspective that daughters can lead their families and pursue their own ambitions that are not domestic. Latinos have high aspirations, but too many doubt their ability to reach those goals. It is important to understand that girls, especially Latinas, should not believe they have a never-ending role in their family. One must seek independence and establish our own values and traditions to grow outside of our homes. Family is forever, but we Latinas can have our own forever too. I would like to expand my research by examining the significance of bringing culture into the classroom by analyzing achievement gaps between minority and majority groups as I pursue a PhD in education. I would like to thank Dr. Strobeck, mentors, and graduate students at Krieger School of Arts and Sciences for always guiding me in my research into the right direction, Dr. Wynn for having my back all summer, and lastly, to my fellow cohort for always cheering me up and supporting me always. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to ask them now or email me, and my email is attached to the slide. Thank you so much. Like, I have my timer right here. I was like, oh, you gotta be quick.
I know that this presentation is well practiced for you, Perla. So that's yeah, keeping us right on track. I know you've heard this before, but your slides are beautiful. The artwork is beautiful. That was a wonderful presentation. I forgot to mention in the beginning, we're such a small group, we could just ask questions, or if you're more comfortable, you can type in the chat. So I'll give it a minute. We'll see if anyone has questions for Perla.
Yesenia. Hi, thank you. I'll go ahead and start. Perla, that was a really beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Very well presented, and I really love how you gave us a good sense of the text, and your discussion on it was also really useful. A couple of questions that I have that came up for me as I was thinking about this was one, I was wondering, what is the time frame that this text is set in? Do you know, can you tell me, like, is it like set in the 1950s and the 2000s?
It's actually set in the early 2000s, and I compared information from the 1950s, since it was when the term feminism kind of came into the view in society, especially in Latino families. And actually, feminism and Marianismo, both of those terms were used more in the health kind of field and were not often used in literature.
And were those terms used by families and individuals themselves? Like in a conversation around the table, would a mother say, you know, you're committed to the family? Or is that or are those terms that were developed like through the social sciences, observing Mexican and Latinx families? And before you answer that, the reason I ask those questions is because I'm also trying to think about how the setting of the time, not only the time frame, but the location. I think you said that the book is set in Texas.
Yes.
Having just moved back to the Yakima Valley from Los Angeles, I just wonder how the experiences of proximity or closeness to Mexico influence how people experience those questions of commitment to family, and how the Yakima Valley maybe is producing something a little bit different. So I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about, I know you're analyzing text, but I'm wondering what you think, if that rings true for this particular region and space that we live in.
Oh, definitely. There was a specific part from the novel that talks about Sophia being discriminated in this new school, which is like a primary white school. So she just talks about how she didn't have to cross the border. The border crossed her family. And all these traditions came along with her. So as this new life kind of welcomes everyone, all these families, they're used to like the Mexican life. And as they come here to America, like again, when the border crossed them, as I quote from the book, it just talks about how they got just so close together because they were afraid that this new life would just make them forget their traditions and values. So they all create this term feminismo, which is having this loyalty and closeness to the family, and again, not bringing shame into the family by staying and respecting the traditions and values and being the perfect daughter, which it's pretty much getting married and serving your children, your spouse, your husband, and that's pretty much it. And yeah, as we continue with the Yakima Valley, I think that we can see it here as well. I think that I felt really connected with the book. I feel like the story really was really personal at the same time. And although there's many books with the same plot, I think that this book I kind of like chose it because the entire book kind of like just appreciates the term feminismo, but I wanted to go more in depth and find a way where Sophia actually goes the opposite way and rejects this term of feminismo. And I think you can see it so much here in the Yakima Valley, since the majority of us are Hispanic families.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I see that Dr. Slonecker has a question.
Yeah, Perla, wonderful presentation, as other people have noted, beautiful slides, great analysis. And I love the way that you bring clarity to the two core concepts that you're bringing to the analysis. That was really well done. I also am struck by how you express your interest in taking these ideas from this novel and extending them in the future to thinking about achievement gaps in education and other things. I have more a statement rather than a question for you, I think, and that's that there also are opportunities to take those sets of core questions and actually move them back in time, right? I'm familiar with research about Mexican-American girlhood in 1920s Los Angeles. This is not my field of study. I'm not widely read here, but there's great research about using Spanish language media as the primary source for exploring and thinking about the ways in which Mexican-American girls, especially second generation immigrant families, were challenging and resisting and pushing back upon expectations that were pressed upon them, both by their own parents, by the media, and those who are sort of in power. And so all of this is a way of saying sometimes the temptation is always to take our core ideas and bring them up into our own world and our own present, because that's what we know and are familiar with. But I also think there's cool things to be learned from stretching that backward and seeing that these challenges and these tensions and pressures are occurring in different ways, but across time and across space.
Definitely, Dr. Slonecker. I think that I found myself enjoying more when I was just reviewing history, again, of these issues, instead of just like, there was so many research done in like, how can we improve this? And I don't know, I think like I just felt more attached if I looked at the history and the origins of where these issues started happening. So definitely I see myself kind of like just comparing how current issues are still the same or maybe different from that like from the past, and how has that evolved into what we know today. So definitely I think that I'll continue to look into the history of every work of piece that I do.
Thank you. Thank you both for your questions. If there aren't any other questions, we'll continue on, and I will turn it over to Millie Land. I'll say that Millie has worked really hard to get this presentation together. This is her first year as part of the pre-humanities or pre-Mellon fellow group, and we're all so proud of her. Millie?
Thank you, Natalie. Let me just get my screen shared. Okay, so hello, my name is Melissa Land, or Millie, as I'm more normally known. I am a sophomore and a pre-humanities student studying English at Heritage University. My research is escapist literature with reading as escapism and researching into diversifying classrooms with popular culture fiction. So into the background for the term escapism, which is to seek distraction from reality or from routine, and the word escapist for a person who indulges in a mental process or an emotional diversion by means of entertainment or other kinds of leisure activities to avoid or retreat from what is considered an unpleasant or escapable reality. And I got this definition from the Routledge Companion to Imaginary Worlds by Lars Konzak, which is actually the book that Natalie went over the bridge to get me. And some of my research questions that I'm looking into is, in what ways is value being placed on other forms of literature compared to culture escapist fiction literature? And why has the study of literature ignored escapist fiction and been accepted in literature analysis? My thesis that I'm looking into and research includes that higher education classrooms needs to reimagine English classes to be more diverse with popular culture escapist fiction, A lot of classes today in higher education teach the classics and literature that has been taught time and time again, when popular culture fiction can be used to get the same value and education that can be received from classic literature, and thus increasing student understanding and invoking more students to engage when reading. This timeline shows the earliest use of escapism, taken again from the Routledge Companion to Imaginary Worlds. Starting with the 20th century, we're looking into Sigmund Freud, who never really used the term escapism, but it nevertheless has been widely used by Freudian literary critics. And Karl Marx, he as well didn't really use the exact term escapism, but again, nonetheless, it was adopted into Marxist vocabulary as well. And in the early 20th century, Marxists regarded Freudianism as equally escapist. In 1921, T.S. Eliot indirectly used the term escapism. In retrospect, points a discussion role of literature and other media creations to escape from the world. In the 1930s, the first to use the term escapist to describe a person who seeks diversion from reality has been ascribed to John Crowe Ransom, who was the founder of the Southern New Criticism School of Literary Criticism in the 1930s. And in 1933, the term escapism, to seek distraction from reality, first appeared in the 1933 Encyclopedia of Social Sciences. And going on lastly, science fiction author Olaf Stapledon made as early as 1939 a systematic attempt to situate the world in a literary perspective, which then goes on to later, like authors that we all kind of know, like J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and Ursula K. Le Guin strove toward a more nuanced view of escapism. Some of my potential methodologies that I have been looking into is reviewing curriculum in higher education classrooms, interviewing faculty and students, and mapping the value with this genre and others. So looking at differences between classic literature and escapist literature, and then using works such as the Routledge Companion to Imaginary Worlds. For my expected results, I expect that there to be that escapist fiction is more valuable than what people are currently placing it as, and that it should be more explored in the literary world, and that including popular culture fiction could open a variety of more doors in student development. I am researching for the end goal for higher education to prioritize student outcomes as opposed to their present expectations, and that classrooms are more accessible to a diverse student body that gets the same outcome. My big picture is that the escapist fiction should have a place of study. It brings creativity, new worlds to light, and it could also help us understand how the human mind works in terms of imagination and self-reflection and the means that people take. There will still be, of course, literary critics who will believe that escapist fiction does not have a place in the literary world. And I will continue to question why and what can be done to bring popular culture escapist fiction towards and forward and a more valued part in classrooms and literature. So thank you to my mentors, Natalie and Paula, for guiding me and believing in me. Thank you to Dr. Nguyen and the Mellon Undergraduate Fellowship at my home institution of Heritage University for allowing me to participate thus far as a pre-humanities student and to be a future Mellon Fellow. And thank you to my cohorts for always supporting me.
Millie, great job. That was fabulous. I so appreciate all of the work that you've done so far this summer. Just great. That was the first time I've seen this presentation in its entirety, so I'm very impressed. I see that Yesenia has a question.
Yes, thank you so much. Millie, that was really great.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I call you Millie? Everyone's calling
Yeah.
you Millie. Man, this is such a cool thing to work with, escapism. And I work on place and I'm a historian, and I'm really interested in how people make place. And so my questions are related to, and as a historian, I also like to think of myself as a good ancestor for the future. And so I'm wondering how escapism, and maybe you don't know the answers to this yet, but maybe to add to something that you look at in the future, how does escapism kind of sit up next to futurism, especially in literature? Afrofuturism, indigenous futurism, when we think about how people of color are writing about, I guess maybe perhaps it's considered escapism, but to think about how they're thinking of the futures of these particular people groups, and not just the future like where I will be in 20 years, but like the future in 1,000 years or in a million years, that has to do with dreaming. So futurism and place, because I really think that our work here at Heritage, it's really important for us to think about the place that we're in and the place that we're on and in, and the communities that we're in. So I think it would be really great to think about escapism as like this mental work, but also what is the physical landscape that we're in. So those are just comments, but I do have one question. You mentioned your third method as possibly mapping the value of escapism. Can you talk a little bit more about how maybe you envision what does that look like, or what does that process look like? Thank
Yes,
you.
definitely. And thank you. Those are great directions to look at. I am really interested in that, kind of like looking into that, and I look forward to exploring them. And I think for mapping, I'm kind of wanting to look into I haven't done a lot of looking into like different literary critics as of yet, but that is something that I want to do. And some of the things that I have read is how they have just found that there isn't a place, and it isn't that interesting, and that we should be looking in and reading into what we already know. And I think looking into mapping them and seeing taking maybe different literary works that involve escapist fiction and seeing where it kind of places with different people, and seeing if maybe students had the choice, or other people had the choice. For example, if there was a class offered, there's a class offered at Heritage that's all about J.R.R. Tolkien, and then could be other classes, say, for example, just on British classics, which one are students going to place more value into, and which one did they think that they're going to get more resources out of and more interested in taking as well.
That's fabulous. So as you're talking, I'm envisioning a really cool digital humanities project that could come from this. If you continue to kind of stay with escapism, and if your plan is to go into graduate studies to kind of carry these ideas forward, that could eventually become a really cool, digital humanities kind of mapping of ideas and values of the type of literature. So it's really exciting to hear your work.
Thank you.
I see that Dr. Slonecker has raised his hand.
A wonderful presentation again. Like with Perla, I like how you have a core concept that helps me sort of grasp exactly what you're thinking about in your case with escapism. And like with Perla, I'm going to suggest a potential set of questions to consider as you continue moving forward in what you're thinking about. I think escapism is a term that can be used in two kind of very different ways. One of which is, I think, most of what your focus is on at this point, which is a literature where the content of that literature is escapist. So science fiction might be an example of a type of escapist literature, right, where there's a literal in the text leaving of the world as we know it. I wonder about, you mentioned Marx as talking about escapism. And I wonder whether Marx is talking about a somewhat different version of escapism. I don't actually know this. I'm just raising it as a question, which is to say the act of reading any literary fiction as being something that is escapist and therefore has consequences for the class struggle. That's what Marx is always thinking about. And he's always concerned with things that are directing the proletariat away from the concerns of this world and to the concerns of a different fake world that might distract them from class struggle. And that really is actually less about, it can be about the content of the novel in question, but it really is about fictional worlds of any sort or any type, which distract you from what's happening. And so that's about the act of reading, right? And sort of the original criticism of reading fiction has long been that it is not grounded in the world. And then in addition to that, I think there's some gendered implications here as well for what it means, especially in the 19th century and the late 18th century. What does it mean for women to be reading fiction? What does it mean for men to be reading fiction? And in what circumstances is that type of escape and escapism sort of coded and acceptable according to identities and things. So anyway, my big comment is think about escapism, not just as in the text, but in the act of reading and what that might mean.
Yes, and I will definitely take that. Thank you so much for going on that. And I'm still in the beginning with everything and just beginning to read Marx. And I am actually really excited to keep going forward with this project and trying to take in like different scenarios and thinking about all these like different authors and like reading Marx and Sigmund Freud and like going into and just learning everything that I can possibly take from this and continuing to grow my research.
Thanks again to Millie and to those with questions. We will keep moving. Our next presenter is Anjuli. Anjuli, are you there?
Yeah, let me just open up my presentation really quick.
Okay. And again, we will have a little bit of time at the end for more general questions.
Okay, sorry, took a little longer. So hi, my name is Angelia Nayer Barragan. I am an English major and a rising junior here at Heritage. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And this summer I participated in the UCLA research writing program. And so very quickly before I begin, I kind of want to start off with like an opening question to my presentation. So how many of you are familiar with or have heard of the movie The Notebook? And you can go ahead and place that in the chat or show like emojis, both work. Okay, great. So the reason why I asked this is because my research revolves around cultural studies, and I will be questioning whiteness and gender and how the classification, and stereotypes are displayed and portrayed specifically within contemporary fiction novels, and even more specifically within Nicholas Sparks novels. So a little bit about how I actually came to the concept of my research. I was raised by outstanding parents who immigrated to the US at a very young age here, which is largely known for agricultural work such as grapes, hops, and as well as fruit, all with the purpose to provide better opportunities for their kids. And so having this Hispanic background and having a low-income family experience, I was able to compose a series of thoughts that questioned gender, culture, and ethnicity within contemporary novels and seeing how they are how different ethnicities are presented. So who actually is Nicholas Sparks? He is an American novelist / screenwriter. He has published 22 novels, 11 of which are now films. He attended the University of Notre Dame with a major in business. And he also worked in real estate, waiting tables, only all after being rejected by publishers, as well as failing to be admitted into law school. So how he intertwines with my research. Sparks has sculpted many novels around whiteness and gender stereotypes. He has presented storylines with white characters and has perpetrated problematic societal norms that relate to gender as well as ethnicity. His novels are actually translated in over 50 languages and have sold over 105 million copies, with the Spanish translations actually being the most popular. So it kind of brings you to the question of why are so few cultures represented within his works while such a variety and diverse group of people are engaging with him? So ultimately, I aim to highlight the ways in which diversity is crucial and achievable through breaking stereotypes and having this inclusivity, because a more diverse approach is needed to be encouraged among authors like Sparks, who have such a wide platform that reach many, many people, especially when considering that the books are sold all over the country. And so here are a few films that you might know of. These are all films that were books that were turned into films. And even just by looking at like the poster of the film, you can kind of see a constant theme throughout all of them. And so here are a few novels that I have been analyzing. Safe Haven, A Walk to Remember, and The Notebook all have similar stories as well as white-based traditions and white-based leading and supportive characters. Safe Haven is about a woman wanting to escape her abusive husband. A Walk to Remember is about a love story where sickness interjects with their love. And then The Notebook, as many of us know, is about two individuals who overcome many obstacles, such as leaving and returning from war, to be together. And so how I choose to go about my research, how I chose to go is I'm going to be looking at representation within his novels, as well as analyzing reader interaction and reaction to the stories, with the main sources once again being his books, and generally using the ones that are the most popular, like The Notebook. So a little bit about my bibliography findings. All of these theorists were found within those two books that I was able to find with the help of my mentors. Jay Dixon gives a general understanding from a historical perspective that overlaps past, present, and future of romance novels, which is really more of a basic like foundation for my research. It gives a lot of details to how literature has evolved throughout the time coming to like present days. And Jayashree Campbell, who describes and reflects upon topics that create main concepts for romance and fiction. Jayashree does a really good job at presenting how these concepts have changed and how they have been implemented in like today's popular fiction readings, like Nicholas Sparks's readings, especially when you look at how Nicholas creates the storylines and the plot lines and the way that the different ways that he chooses to route the characters and their futures. And Aaron S. Young, who allows for detailed observations and research that mainly see through the foundation of race, ethnicity, and whiteness representations within romance novels. Aaron is one of the theorists that I'm kind of looking more into when looking at those three main topics, because Aaron does give a lot of context and just detailed and really does dive in and scrutinize how those three things are seen within popular romance in today's time. And so having that relate back to Nicholas Sparks, seeing how he presents his characters and whether he does or doesn't know it, seeing how ethnicity is portrayed throughout his storylines. And very quickly before I end, I want to say thank you to my cohort for always being there and supporting me, and for my mentors, Natalie and Paula, as well as Dr. Nguyen and the MMUF program.
Thank you so much, Anjuli. That
Thanks,
was great
Anjuli.
to hear.
Oh, I just have one comment, kind of to bring everyone up to speed. You did mention bibliography. So we had several sessions on Zotero, and students have been faithfully recording their, not only the resources they found, both the University of Washington Library and through other sources Paula has also recommended through purchase of books to our program, but they've been looking at articles in various other areas as well that help them to be analytical thinkers and writers. And so Zotero is a very wonderful tool. And so I know Anjali's has dug deep into that process and really looked at how to shape her research program or her research question after she's read quite a bit. So the process that we go through, just so you know, for the students who are in their beginning stages, we have freshmen, as Millie is a freshman. Perla is also finished her freshman year, right, Perla? And you're a sophomore, yes. So 2 freshmen, and then we have people, Anjuli, going into her junior, rising sophomores and rising juniors, even rising junior we have in our program that's not here. But each of our PhD mentors has a detailed lesson plan for the entire summer. They meet both individually and in a mentoring circle group. So I don't know how many hours these students have put into this project evaluation, project development, but way more hours than you could probably imagine dedicating to something like this. So really appreciate their efforts. And methodology, theoretical framework, they're getting used to the vocabulary as well as the writing process, the writing that is acceptable in academic circles at the higher levels. And so they've really done a great amount of work. So quickly, I'll say we have an undergraduate opportunity coming up at Idaho at a college, and we will definitely have you present again. And then they'll be attending, observing the Mellon Regional Conference coming up in November, and another conference actually coming up, as well as they'll have an audience with the Mellon Foundation for this work. So want to thank them for all this wonderful levels. You see all the wonderful levels of development where we are, from getting the research question in play to the analytical kinds of directions they're going. Appreciate all the comments of how these could be expanded, the directions could be expanded. We've had sociology of education as a checkpoint. We've had obviously gender studies with Anjuli, but all kinds of directions are explored as well. So you don't get to see all the explorations when they present, but there's a lot of directions they're thinking about. So thank you so much for your questions that I wanted to interject. Anjuli, that was a wonderful presentation. Nicholas Sparks is a fascinating person to write about, all kinds of themes we've talked about, and Paula's directed you in a really wonderful in-depth study of romance fiction. Pepper Schwartz would be proud. She's a University of Washington's current resident, well, not resident anymore, but worked with her years and years ago. Now she's on Married at First Sight, the big hit television series, but so she's not back at the UW, of course, but anyway, she'd be proud of you, Anjuli. She'd be proud of you if she saw your work. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I
just had a quick suggestion. I'm so sorry. I had a quick suggestion for Anjuli for future work. I worked with a playwright in East Los Angeles, Josefina Lopez. She runs a theater house, and I actually worked on a local history museum that we established inside of her space. But she wrote the play, Real Women Have Curves. And she's just a really wonderful person which eventually became a movie and is now like a very popular movie. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. If you ever want to do, I guess if you think about this work that you're doing now and like how to put it in conversation with, maybe writers of color, women, if you want to think about how to kind of put this in conversation with other works, and you're interested in talking with her, or if you're ever in LA and want to meet with her, I'd be happy to connect you with her, or just to at least encourage you to look at her film and just to think about how gender and race and ethnicity plays a role in how writing is done, and then how it gets translated onto the screen. And those implications. So yeah, really, really important, very powerful work. Thank you so much for sharing, Anjuli.
Yes, thank you. I would be so interested in looking into that. I've heard of it before. Yeah, I would be really interested. Thank you.
That's such a generous offer. Okay, we will move the presentation over to Carol. Oh,
there's a comment in the chat that's important to read coming from Dr. Slonecker, just to make sure point that out to everyone to please respond to that comment, because it's pretty a good growth comment, actually. Yeah. How rich to think about the seeming tension between how undiverse Sparks' books are and how wide of a relationship he seems to have, especially in translated forms. That's a really, really important critical direction to hit in your work, Anjuli. I'm sure you recognize that already, but from the comment, but thank you, Dr. Slonecker.
And just to be clear, that was me echoing back to Anjuli what she said in her presentation, which is, I've read one Nicholas Sparks novel. It was one of the worst reading experiences of my life. but I certainly had no sense that he had a broad readership beyond the United States, which I suppose makes a certain type of sense. But reader response is always so difficult to actually gauge. But just sales numbers illustrate something.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at that. I think it's kind of like opposed to like Perla's presentation, for example, she was able to relate a lot to her novels, but looking at like Nicholas Sparks novels, you don't really, there's not a lot of opportunity for his readers to resemble to some of the characters because it's not diverse really at all. So I think it's a really interesting thing to look at. Thank you.
Okay, I'm so happy with all of the questions and comments and responses and positive directions that everyone has shared with our presenters. I didn't think we would be at 11:51 with one presenter left, but here we are. So we'll move it over to Carol, and then we will open it up for questions if people have time in their schedule.
Sorry for not having the background again. I couldn't figure it out. But let me share my screen real fast. Okay. Can you guys all see it? Okay. So hello, my name is Carolina Moran. I'm from Heritage University. I'm part of the Department of History. And I was a part of the summer internship at UCLA, which was very fruitful, as you guys can see here by my presentation. So today I'll talk about my presentation, which is titled Addressing Gaps Found in the United States History Curriculum and Why It Does Not Resonate with People of Color. So to give a little bit of context on my project, history is a subject that is not standardized, which gives each state, 50 in total, each state to teach history however they see fit, which often results in certain events not being included. Some include, but are not limited to, slavery, white supremacy, and civil rights movement. And some states do talk about these events, but they don't necessarily talk about them directly, if that makes sense. They just kind of use it as an example of something else, but they did not fully go into detail about what it actually was, the factors that went into it, and the outcomes of it. And so that's pretty bad. And so there have also been recent events where books have been banned, and a lot of it was due to racial issues being a part of it, as well as violence, which is a reality of our past and part of our current day. And I feel that all this is done to push a specific narrative, a Eurocentric narrative even. And so given this tension, I'm interested in researching how history is being taught and lack thereof. More specifically, how it impacts the learning of students of color and how they engage in the K-12 public school system. I'll be taking a deeper look as well into both the state of California and Texas and examine their history curricula and their involvement in teaching the Vietnam War. So my research questions here are, how is history being taught in the public school system, as well as how is the engagement of students of color with history as it's being taught today? So, and particularly, to start off, I particularly picked California and Texas because I have always heard that California was a more inclusive, had a more inclusive way of that they went about teaching in school, whereas Texas, I have heard that they have restricted and limited the way that they teach, which has now since changed a little bit, which I'll get into later. But to begin, both these states have a very rich and nuanced history, but they do, like I mentioned, go about teaching history differently. And what's interesting to note is that the books that they use in the history classes are both published by the same people and have the same authors, but there's different material in it, which I found crazy because I would have thought that they would have been that they would have been published by different publishers, considering how different they are politically. And that's kind of why they have different material, because of politics and whatnot. Sorry. Which is kind of understandable and why they would limit what they teach, since it does have a touch of politics. But even then, although history is a touchy subject, it's still very important to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly, as ultimately what these textbooks and history classes overall will be teaching is the future generation of voters. And so in placing importance on getting history standardized, it will not only students in each state will have the full history, like be all on the same page and have an understanding of their country's past, and ultimately better their country's future. And as you guys see here, both California and Texas student body population is both over half. And they both are treading to a more inclusive way of teaching history. As I mentioned, California has now starting an ethnic studies model, and it's part of the high school curriculum now, as well as university. And what ethnic studies basically refers to is the histories and experiences of racially ethnic groups in the United States. And Texas has recently as well implemented a new ethnic studies course, which focuses on Mexican American descent. But as I mentioned, history, Texas also has a history of limiting what they teach and how it's being taught. And one of those ways is by banning critical race theory. And it's House Bill 3979, and it'll impact the way social studies is being taught in public schools. And so critical race theory has to do with how race and racism impact social structures, but like I also mentioned earlier, I'll be focusing on the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement surrounding it. And in particular, I wanted to focus on the Vietnam War because I feel it is one that is under talked about, but it's because it's complex in that there's no really clear winner or loser, because that's not what it's all about at the end of the day. And what's being taught now is just overshadowed by World War I, World War II, and the Civil Wars, which I don't want to take out of what's being taught in history, but rather add in. And one of the ways is by focusing on the Vietnam War. But like I mentioned, the anti-war movements, and Chicano moratorium and the Black Panther anti-war activism marches that happen, they both essentially highlight that people of color were not recognized as individuals, yet were forced and drafted into the front lines of a war for a country that didn't recognize them as human, which is ultimately really bad. And so that's why all these protests happened to begin with. And they also happen in Texas, as you can see here, the San Marcos 10, which has to do with 70 university students that protested, but then authorities got involved, so only 10 were left, and they went down as the San Marcos 10. And then the Austin scene, which has to do with UT campus march, a march that happened from the UT campus to the Capitol, and it was about 10,000 marchers. What's interesting though is they had asked permission from the city council, but they banned their permit, and then the district judge barred the city council so that the marchers could march, and that's how the Austin scene happened. So my approach and next steps, I would do a close reading of the textbooks, as well as look at the history curriculum in each state, as well as any policies that will or are taking place that will affect the way history is being taught, as well as archival work and interviews with teachers who are predominantly in Latino and BIPOC communities. And I want to conduct these oral histories with educators from both these states to see how it is to teach history, especially in the confines of being an educator, and if they strictly teach by textbook or if they add in their own knowledge. I also want to look at other states, not necessarily just California and Texas, maybe Washington and California, or Washington and another state, as well as looking at history of America from outside of the country to kind of help fill in the gaps that American history has, if that makes sense. And so overall, I wish to accomplish with my project is to bring awareness to this kind of disconnect between students of color and the material, and that's maybe particularly due to the underrepresentation that is found in history, since it is preferred, what's the word? It's mostly Eurocentric, and so there are a lot of voices and stories of people of color during that time are often left out, and that's what I kind of want to bring back. And as you saw earlier, it is happening slowly, but it's happening. And so I want that, as well as implementing better teaching tactics and teaching a more inclusive history, which in turn leads students be more aware people in society by this. Yeah. So thank you to all my current teacher, fellow Mellons, as well as mentors such as Paula and Natalie. My mentor from UCLA, especially Daisy, and most important of all, Dr. Wynn, because without her, none of this would be possible. Yeah, thank you.
Great job, Carol. We'll make an adjustment so the UCLA logo isn't bigger than the Heritage logo. No, I'm just kidding. I'm so happy to hear your presentation. It's so clear that through your summer at UCLA, you became immensely inspired by so many facets of this project. And I see that Professor Hunter, you said his hand is up. I would be really curious also to hear from Dr. Slonecker, particularly, because of the history connection and just, where he might see some fruitful directions, given that the scope of this is still in development and very wide. Yes, Professor Hunter.
Thank you. Carol, your work is so exciting to me because I actually worked on a museum called the Boyle Heights Museum in East Los Angeles. And our second exhibit was around the student power and student walkouts of 1968. And we're actually relaunching our website. It should be updated by the end of this month, but it's boyleheightsmuseum.org. If you go on there now, you can actually see the exhibit from 2018 called Walking Out for Student Power, I think. Walking Out for Justice. And I have a lot of images and materials from the student walkouts that so they're not directly related to the Vietnam War, but there's certainly the start of that kind of activism that was coming up. And then we get into the Chicano moratorium in Los Angeles. So if you're interested in looking at more images or reading any of the articles that we looked at to produce that particular exhibit, I'd be more than happy to share that stuff with you. I also wrote an article called Beautiful Blowouts that has to do with the students and their learning and the ways that they felt being left out in the classroom, and in particular in the history that they were learning, which is my own experience as well. I graduated from Wapta High School, but only by the skin of my teeth, because I was flunking history, because I was working, but also because I was not in the history that I was learning. And now I'm a historian. So there's a lot here that it really resonates with me. It's really important. But I also have raw materials that might be interesting to you. So yeah, just send me an email and let me know. I'd love to just talk a little bit more. And then the last thing I want to say is that each state does have their learning standards online. And we actually use that as an activity in one of my classrooms, looking at the state standards and how history is developed and taught in that particular state. So make sure you access that kind of stuff online. That's really readily available. And I'd love to just see how your project develops in the future. So no question, just a comment and a high praise for your work.
No, yeah, thank you. I would definitely look into that and we'll get in contact with you, hopefully. And yeah, I did notice that the curriculum for each state is online, and I was going through it, and I noticed that in California and Texas, it does mention that it teaches the Vietnam War, But because of my UCLA internship, someone from Texas was there, and they told me that they don't remember it ever being taught, and so it was like, okay, so it's in the curriculum, but it's not being taught, and so like that needs to be fixed in my opinion. And yeah, kind of how you like this project really means a lot to me, and so I can't wait to see what I do with it and where I go with it. But I'm really excited, so thank you.
Yeah, there definitely is a difference between a curriculum as it's articulated on paper and how it's carried out. My daughters in Prosser were one time introduced to a video about the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest by the teacher saying to them, we have to watch this boring video, bear with me, right? And so what is accomplished by that, right? But a complete contradiction to what the curriculum is intended to accomplish. But that's a separate serious issue. But I went into your presentation, Carol, deciding that I needed to ask a question because I made comments for the others. So here's my question. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about violence and the ways in which violence guides the thinking of policymakers in shaping curricula for young children, right? So as young as 5 and 6, and then as old as 17 or 18. So yeah, what do you think? What are your thoughts about that with regard to your presentation?
So kind of how I mentioned, like books were banned specifically because there was violence, and I feel that is the case in that they feel students will become violent because of what they read, but I don't think that's how it works, in my opinion, because there's other material. The internet is wide, so if they really wanted to find like violent things so they can become violent, they could do it and be violent, I guess. But books are simply, the gateways into knowledge, essentially. And like I mentioned, we have to learn the good, the bad, and the ugly, because in only acknowledging it will we ever fully grow, especially in a society. And I feel I forgot to mention too that like Southern states have been lacking more in teaching a full history, and I think they even stated states' rights as being part of the Civil War, but that wasn't really the case. But they use it because they don't want to shine themselves like America to not be great or whatnot. But America isn't great, and we need to acknowledge that, because we keep having this indoctrinated way of teaching, like we're never gonna fully grow, we're just always gonna be stagnant and having this divide ultimately. And that's, violence does do that, but at the end of, I don't know, violence isn't, I don't know how to explain it, but violence, I don't think violence in books or anything else makes people violent. I think people themselves choose to be violent, if that makes sense. Kind of went on a rant, but hopefully that answers your question.
I just want to acknowledge how far Carol's come also in her thinking. In the beginning, when we're talking about research questions, we start with a very broad scope, and we use a funnel approach to get it down to a manageable, analytical, foundational question. And so Carol was very interested. She's got a really curious mind. All these students have really curious intellectual capacities. And Carol was looking at eugenics, early eugenics from the turn of the century, coming forward to really establish ideas of identity divisiveness and scientific thought. And we talked about the World's Fair in Chicago, and we talked about how identity constructs were happening in public spaces. And so she's really followed this path. And so I just wanted to say to all of our presenters, your initial ideas were so compelling and wonderful, and now they're being funneled and continue to be shaped. And this conversation and these discussions at this high level are very helpful in challenging you and just inspiring you. And it inspires our faculty too. I think it inspires all of us to really think, wow, this is a pretty accomplished group. And it takes hours and hours and hours and hours of dedication that Natalie and Paula have put forward, in addition to other mentors, but mostly Natalie and Paula this summer with our humanities reading and our humanities research process. And so it's really, yes, and of course they turn it over and say it was the students who were driving the force of their accomplishment, which is true. And we're so dedicated. You all were so dedicated. Really proud to have you move on from this space into the larger spaces of presentation for the future. So thank you all so much.
Okay, well, we are past our time, but if there are any pressing questions for any of our presenters, now is the time to ask. Oh, yes, okay. I see a hand raised. Is it Professor Hernandez?
Oh, I like that, Professor Hernandez. It is not, but I'll take it.
Okay.
That actually sounds really good. No, just more of actually a comment. I couldn't really, it'd be unfair for me to ask a great question just because I was kind of listening in and out as I was also meeting with students, but I am an admissions counselor here, and I thought I'd tap into the meeting just to get to know more about the program. All your guys' topics, amazing. Carol, Melissa, Perla, Anjuli, great work. I just graduated with my master's, and all these topics, research are graduate level presentations. So awesome of you guys to continue, pressing on to your guys' topics and education. You guys have great mentors and great guidance. So continue that up. And yeah, like I said, graduate level, master's level. Yeah, you guys are pretty awesome. And so hopefully, Natalie, if you can still send me that recording, I would love to fully give my attention to that, just to hear from those topics. But yeah, great work, everybody. I loved what I was able to kind of catch up and pick up on, and then also just the Q&A afterwards. Great work once again. And I gotta take off here, just a student came in. So once again, thank you. And I'll keep looking for more invites because these were really awesome.
Professor Hernandez, before you dash off, we do accept freshmen into our program. So all of your admissions people, freshmen at whatever level can come, we engage with them in a we call it pre-Mellon, but for the grant purposes, we have to call it Humanities Fellows. But we guide them and bring them into the areas of passion that they're wanting to see change. And we introduce them to all the vocabulary and everything. So as an admissions counselor, please direct your students our way for our freshman program in Mellon. And Leadership Alliance. So thank you so much for being here.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Will do. Yes,
thank
absolutely.
You.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Perla, promoting Mellon. Yes, thank you. I guess that's the final wrap-up message. Please promote this program. We really can get a critical mass together of thinkers at Heritage that are bright and really driven and are willing to work for these kinds of topics that need to be in our world as explorations and as policy eventually. And the PhD is becoming so much more accessible with our graduate student and our graduate candidate, our PhD candidate. And we plan on building on that program. It's with other institutions, Vanderbilt and Brown and other institutions in our Northwest, Washington State and U of W. So we have a program plan to go forward with that and funding for that. Also, Yesenia mentioned earlier, Digital Humanities. We are working on Mapping Your Journey, which is a digital humanities project to help students get out their critical ideas. And their next presentation in the spring will be something along the lines of digital humanities with mapping for history purposes, and then other kinds of representation of ideologies and thinking, their cognitive map basically on display. So we really appreciate all the comments, and thank you so much to our dynamic duo in the history department, Dr. Slonecker and the soon-to-be Dr. Yesenia Hunter. We just definitely value you as mentors and really appreciate you taking time away from another activity we had today to really hear the students and their thinking. So Paula and Natalie, I can't say enough about you all. We're having another Mexican dinner to, not in Leavenworth this time, but a more credible maybe spot where the food is a little bit different. But to make our planning for the fall purposes. And Yesenia, thank you for offering your mentoring to the students in your areas. Really want to encourage Anjuli with Real Women Have Curves. It's one of my favorite plays, and I love the movie as well. So I want to encourage you to reach out to Yesenia. So thank you. I'll turn it back to Natalie to wrap us up. Not to wrap us up. Paula, would you like to? Would love to hear your voice, Paula. Say goodbye, hello, or comment on the work of your students.
This is just like the coolest thing for me to see all of this come together and the journeys that these students have taken me on. It's just really inspiring, and I just love, and it's super validating to hear colleagues comment and see as well the progress that students have been making, and it's just, and to top it off, I have never stopped bleeding blue and gold for heritage. So it's just fabulous to see everyone, and it makes me teary. So it's just exciting to see everybody, but I just have so many things. I've been keeping my mouth shut because these students have listened to me like for months now, and they don't need to hear me. They need to hear others. And so I'll keep my comments about your presentations, which were fabulous, to myself. But I'll send you guys little emails about what I took away. Just cool ideas that Yesenia and Blake have sparked in me, at least. So I've just had other ideas that I wanted to share with you guys, and yay. And it's great to see everyone, and congratulations on all this work. And I hope that you guys can see, like, we have beginners and like what you were saying, Dr. Wynn, beginners and people who've spent, considerable more time. And it's just really important to be able to see how work progresses and it changes. And you can be like Carol and start with something like eugenics and work your way to something, to me, that's just as equally important, and how history is represented in various parts of our country. And there's so many different things, and it's yeah, I'm inspired as always. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're going to end our conference here, and just a big congratulations also again. Just really proud of all of your progress, and thank you so much for all of your encouragement from our faculty and our mentors. So appreciate you guys. You deserve this moment. You deserve many more, and there'll be more coming. So polish up your slides. Don't let them get dust. Don't dust them off, and have them ready to go, because we have more gatherings coming up. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay. Oh,
Great.
Yay. Oh, I'm glad you guys didn't leave. So thank you so much, Natalie, for facilitating this.
Natalie, my gosh, this has been great.
Yeah. It's
amazing. The trick that I learned this in Peace Corps mostly, you just like make a flyer or put something on paper, and then people take it very seriously.
You're not kidding. Like, people suddenly start talking about inviting parents and stuff. I'm like, oh
boy. there is something about it. Yeah, it has a weightiness to it.
Okay. Sorry, Cosmo is
my thank you. I won't keep you guys. I sent out the doodle poll. So
we'll pull it. I'll pull it out.
Whenever you get time to look at the doodle poll. I think it's for the first week in September. Plenty of time, so we'll figure it out. Paul, it's so good to see you.
We'll meet in person.
Yes,
it's great. This is the kind of stuff that we all need, I think, to see the progress of all of this, and it was just really great.
We're gonna